When you hear the phrase hazardous waste, what do you think of? A leaking 55-gallon drum? A chemical spill on the highway? Maybe even a nuclear meltdown? These events certainly can generate hazardous waste, but so can a lot of other things that we often do in our everyday lives. Maybe you're changing a fluorescent light bulb or the batteries in your remote control. Perhaps you're replacing your thermostat or finishing up a can of spray paint. When you throw these materials away, they are, in fact, hazardous waste. However, since so many people and industries use them, and they have a low risk of harming people and the environment, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, decided that they could be treated differently. So, in 1995, the EPA streamlined their regulations for the disposal of many of these materials and classified them as universal waste. Even though the criteria for their disposal aren't as strict as they are for other hazardous wastes, universal wastes can still be dangerous. That's why it's important to know how to handle them properly and dispose of them safely. In this program, we'll take a look at the different materials that are considered universal waste, the regulations that you must adhere to when you're handling them, and what to do if something goes wrong. Dealing with hazardous waste has always been a difficult job, not just because working with it is dangerous, but also because the requirements for disposing of it make the process extremely complicated. In fact, for many years, any organization that wanted to dispose of a battery or even a light bulb would have to go through an extensive and inconvenient set of hazardous waste disposal procedures. However, in 1995, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, recognized the need to get certain hazardous wastes out of landfills and recycle them in order to preserve resources and reduce chemical releases into the air and soil. To accomplish this, they created a different class of hazardous waste called universal waste, because at some point almost every business and government agency generates it. While items classified as universal waste are still technically hazardous waste, there are fewer regulatory requirements regarding their disposal because they are less harmful to people and the environment than other types of hazardous waste. This makes it easier for organizations to recycle them, since it doesn't take as much time or effort to go through the disposal process. There are 5 commonly discarded materials that are considered universal waste: batteries, pesticides, mercury-containing equipment, certain types of light bulbs, and aerosol cans. Even though the criteria for their disposal aren't as strict as for other hazardous wastes, there are still processes and procedures that must be followed to ensure that they are handled and transported safely. When universal waste items are being discarded, they are stored, shipped, and transported by 4 types of companies: small quantity handlers, large quantity handlers, universal waste transporters, and universal waste destination facilities. They are all responsible for processing the waste in ways that protect both people and the environment from harm. It all begins with the universal waste handlers. These are the people who generate universal waste, as well as people who receive and consolidate it. A universal waste generator is a person or organization that creates or generates waste, such as a company that uses batteries and disposes of them when they no longer work. When they throw these batteries away, they are the ones who are both generating and handling the waste. But sometimes generators don't want to store and transport the universal waste that they create. So instead of completing the disposal process themselves, they can choose to transfer it to a waste handler. These companies collect the waste from different generators and send it on to other handlers, recyclers, treatment or disposal facilities. The EPA's Universal Waste Regulation classifies waste handlers by how much waste they handle in a year. Handlers that accumulate less than 5,000 kilograms of all universal waste categories are called small quantity handlers, while large quantity handlers accumulate 5,000 kilograms or more. Both of these types of handlers are allowed to accumulate and store universal waste for no longer than a year. When that time is up, the waste must be transported to a universal waste destination facility. So in addition to collecting the waste, the handlers are responsible for preparing the waste for shipment to these facilities. This includes clearly labeling containers to indicate the type of waste that's inside, using the terminology found in the EPA regulations. Depending on the type of waste that is being transported, universal waste handlers may also have to meet the Department of Transportation's shipping regulations for packaging, labeling, marking, placarding, and proper shipping papers. Once a handler has prepared a shipment, it is handed off to a universal waste transporter, who can store the waste for up to 10 days. When the shipment is in transit, the driver is required to follow all applicable DOT regulations for universal waste. Eventually, the shipment arrives at the destination facility. This is where the waste is actually treated, recycled, or disposed of. Both the handlers and the destination facility are responsible for tracking the shipment and knowing where it is at all times. No matter what your role in the universal waste process is, it's vitally important that you and everyone in your facility receive the training that is necessary to process the waste safely. This training should include information about how to recognize potential hazards and respond to incidents involving universal waste, and how you can keep yourself safe if an emergency involving a waste should occur. Batteries. Where would we be without them? From flashlights to electric cars, they have become a necessity in our society. But if the disposal process were too complicated, companies might be tempted to get rid of their batteries without following proper procedures, to save time and money, which would be extremely bad for the environment. Because of this, rather than classify them as hazardous waste, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, has declared some batteries to be universal waste, making it easier to recycle them quickly and safely. As long as the casing of the battery cell remains intact and closed, universal waste handlers are allowed to sort batteries by type or mix battery types in one container, and discharge batteries by bleeding off their electricity. They can also disassemble battery packs into individual batteries, remove batteries from consumer products, and regenerate used batteries by restoring their charge. The biggest problem with disposing of batteries is that they can leak, exposing the hazardous material that's inside. This can not only contaminate the soil, but it can also burn your skin, mouth, and eyes if you are exposed to it. The first step in preventing leaks is to place batteries in a secure, leak-proof container. The container must be inspected for any damage before use, and once the batteries are inside, it should be closed securely. You should never store batteries in a metal container. This can actually cause short-circuiting, which creates a major fire hazard. If you have any questions about approved materials for battery storage containers, ask your supervisor. But short-circuiting can also happen anytime the positive and negative ends of batteries touch each other. This causes them to discharge and heat up to very high temperatures very quickly. You can prevent short-circuiting by placing tape over a battery's terminals, packaging batteries so their terminals can't come into contact with each other, discharging batteries according to manufacturer's instructions, or placing individual batteries in a separate plastic bag before putting them into a container. When you're labeling individual batteries, the label should say either universal waste battery, or used battery. If you're labeling a container that is holding multiple batteries, the labels should say either universal waste batteries, or used batteries. Even if you're careful, there's always a possibility a battery will leak. If this happens, you should first place the battery in a sealable 5-gallon pail with absorbent material such as paper towels. Then scoop or wipe up as much of the discharged material from the spill area as possible, and wipe down the area itself with a wet sponge. Next, place the dirty rags, towels, and sponges that you used in your cleanup in the 5-gallon pail with the damaged batteries. Finally, you should seal the container and label it. A leaking battery becomes regular hazardous waste, so make sure you label it appropriately. When you're done, wash your hands and face thoroughly. Every year, the United States uses about 1 billion pounds of pesticides to control weeds, insects, and other pests. That's a lot of chemicals. Not only that, but large amounts of pesticides are also produced each year that are either not used or are recalled by the manufacturer because they don't meet the quality standards set by the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. So how can we safely dispose of these pesticides that aren't used? Although some of them must go through the regular hazardous waste disposal process, pesticides that have either been recalled or accumulated through waste pesticide collection programs can be classified as universal waste, making disposal much faster and easier. According to the EPA, a universal waste handler must handle pesticides in a way that prevents damage to the environment. Handlers are the people that originally purchase the pesticides or receive and consolidate unused material. This includes storing them in closed, secure containers that are compatible with the pesticide and don't show signs of leakage or damage. The containers themselves should be stored in a locked area, preferably indoors. Sometimes pesticides will have to be transported in a vehicle or stored in particularly large vessels. These should also be closed and secure and have no evidence of leakage or damage. When they are ready to be transported to a universal waste destination facility, the container, tank, or transport vessel that holds the pesticides should be labeled or marked clearly with the label that was on the product when it was purchased and the words Universal Waste Pesticides or Waste Pesticides. One of the waste handler's most important responsibilities is to ensure that pesticides and mixtures involving pesticides are not spilled or released into the environment at any stage of the disposal process. But sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, spills do happen. So it's important to know how you can help to contain one while still keeping yourself safe. If it's a liquid spill, you should quickly cover the area with an absorbent material such as cat litter, paper towels, or newspaper. Once the spill has been absorbed, sweep up or collect the contaminated absorbent materials and seal them in a heavy-duty plastic bag for disposal. Dry pesticide spills, such as dusts, powders, or granules, should be lightly misted with water or covered with a sheet of plastic, then collected in a heavy-duty bag for disposal. After you're done, make sure to wash your hands thoroughly before you return to work. From conducting electricity to filling cavities, mercury is an element that can be used in a variety of ways. But while it can be useful, high levels of mercury can also be toxic. And being exposed to it could cause many health problems, including severe lung and nervous system damage. This risk increases when mercury-containing equipment, such as thermostats, barometers, and even blood pressure cuffs aren't disposed of safely. At the same time, when these materials are disposed of properly, they pose a relatively low risk to people and the environment. Because of this, most things that contain mercury can be treated as universal waste. When mercury is used in equipment, it is usually housed in an ampule, an airtight vial made of glass, plastic, metal, or any combination of these materials. These ampules can be removed from the equipment for disposal, but only if the handlers can remove and manage the ampules in a way that will prevent breakage. Remove the ampules only over or in a containment device, like a tray or a pan. And immediately capture any mercury that spills or leaks and put it into a secure container. The ampules must also be removed in an area that is well ventilated, stored in closed, non-leaking containers that are in good condition, and packed in their container with materials that are adequate to prevent breakage. If you are dealing with equipment where the mercury ampules can't be removed, it should always be stored in a leak-proof container with a lid. Make sure to use a plastic container, such as a 5-gallon bucket. You should never use metal containers because they can actually absorb mercury. While it's crucial for universal waste handlers to adhere to all of these requirements, the most important part of removing mercury ampules from their equipment is ensuring that employees receive the training regarding these processes so that they can keep themselves safe. When containers of equipment or ampules are ready to be transported to a universal waste destination facility, they should be labeled as either universal waste, mercury-containing equipment, waste mercury-containing equipment, or used mercury-containing equipment. Any containers of mercury-containing thermostats must be labeled with either universal waste mercury thermostats, waste mercury thermostats, or used mercury thermostats. As we've discussed, mercury can be extremely toxic, so if you ever experience a mercury spill, you should clean it up immediately using your facility's spill kit. In addition to collection equipment, such as chemical sponges, aspirator bottles, and disposal bags, this kit will provide the PPE that you need to keep yourself safe. The contents might be different depending on the facility, but most spill kits will include gloves, goggles, shoe or boot covers, and vapor suppressor bottles. Once you've used the spill kit to remove as much of the liquid mercury as possible from the surfaces it's on, go over the areas with sticky tape. This will pick up any remaining particles of mercury. Next, place any dirty rags, towels, sponges, tape, and other cleanup materials that you have used in a sealable plastic bag. Then seal the bag in a 5-gallon bucket. Cleaned up mercury is always considered hazardous waste, so make sure to store the bucket according to your facility's hazardous waste disposal guidelines. Lastly, thoroughly wash your hands and face before returning to work. It's second nature to us. Every time we walk into a room, we turn on the lights. But sometimes, even when you flip the switch, you can still find yourself in the dark. This usually means it's time to change a light bulb. Most used or broken light bulbs are safe for you to handle and throw away. But bulbs that contain mercury, referred to by the EPA as lamps, are considered hazardous waste because the mercury inside them can be very harmful to people and the environment. Before 1999, you had to give these lamps to a hazardous waste handler when they were ready to be thrown away, and the handler had to comply with the federal regulations for hazardous waste disposal. However, in 1999, the EPA made it much easier to dispose of low-toxicity, mercury-containing lamps by classifying them as universal waste. The EPA considers several types of lamps to be universal waste, including fluorescent bulbs, high-intensity discharge bulbs, neon light bulbs, mercury vapor bulbs, high-pressure sodium bulbs, and metal halide bulbs. Even though universal waste lamps have a low toxicity, they still need to be handled with care and disposed of in a way that prevents the release of any hazardous substances into the environment. The best way to do this is to store them properly. Long lamps like fluorescent tubes should be stored in a sturdy cardboard box or another tall container that can prevent breakage. Also, once the lamps are placed in them, the containers must remain closed and show no evidence of leakage. Smaller lamps can be stored in a 5-gallon plastic bucket or a sturdy non-metal container with a lid. You should never store lamps in a metal container because it can absorb harmful materials from the lamps and become hazardous waste itself. You should also never store universal waste lamps loose, taped together, or in an open container. The containers that hold the lamps should be labeled clearly with either universal waste lamps or used lamps. Even if you store and handle universal waste lamps correctly, they can still be easy to break. And if that happens, you need to know how to safely clean up the result. When the toxic mercury inside these lamps is exposed to the environment, they are no longer considered universal waste. So if you encounter any broken, leaking, or damaged lamps, you must treat them as hazardous waste. If handlers find a lamp that shows any evidence of breakage, leakage, or damage, they must immediately clean it up, place it into a closed, structurally sound container, and label it as hazardous waste. If you handle any broken, leaking, or damaged universal waste lamps, you should always wash your hands and face thoroughly before you go back to work. How many aerosol cans do you think you have around your home? 5? 10? According to the EPA, the average American home contains about 46 aerosol cans. This might seem like a lot, but think about all of the aerosol products that you use. Spray paint, hairspray, insect repellent, and even shaving cream can all come in an aerosol can, and the list goes on. Until 2020, aerosol cans were classified as hazardous waste, which made their disposal process very complicated. But now aerosol cans are considered universal waste in most states, which makes it much easier to dispose of them. Aerosol cans are defined by 3 characteristics. They contain a gas that is compressed, liquefied, or dissolved under pressure. Their sole purpose is to expel a liquid, paste, or powder, and they are fitted with a self-closing release device that allows the contents to be ejected by the gas. When they are discarded, these cans must be handled in a way that prevents the release of any harmful material into the environment, typically the propellant. This begins with removing the spray tips from the cans so they don't discharge while they're being stored or shipped. After the tips have been removed, the cans should be gathered and put into a container that shows no evidence of leakage, spillage, or damage. A second important aspect of handling aerosol cans is protecting them from sources of heat. Aerosols often contain gases that can ignite easily, so they should be handled and stored in a cool environment. Once universal waste handlers take possession of them and ensure that each aerosol can is intact, they can sort the cans by type or mix intact cans in one container and remove the actuators inside the cans to further reduce the risk of accidental release. Then the cans or a container with cans in it must be labeled with universal waste aerosol cans, waste aerosol cans, or used aerosol cans. The universal waste rule also allows handlers to treat aerosol cans by puncturing them and draining their contents so that the cans can be recycled as scrap metal instead of being thrown away. However, puncturing and draining an aerosol can be dangerous. The contents are under high pressure and could also be extremely flammable. So any handlers who perform these processes are required to follow certain requirements to keep workers safe. First and foremost, they must always use a device that is specifically designed to safely puncture the cans and contain any residue or emissions. And even then, employees still need to protect themselves with the appropriate personal protective equipment, PPE. This includes safety glasses with side shields, goggles or equivalent eye protection, a face shield, footwear with reinforced toes, nitrile gloves, and a chemical splash apron. In certain situations, you might also need to wear a respirator. Since aerosol cans can be so flammable, the equipment that punctures the cans should always be used in a well-ventilated area, and there is absolutely no smoking allowed. Finally, written procedures that contain all of this information, plus anything else that people need to know when they're working with the cans, such as how to handle a spill or leak, must be published and distributed to all employees who are involved in the process. Because hazardous waste can be very harmful to the environment, the EPA has strict regulations for disposing of it. However, they have designated some common, low-risk items as universal waste, which makes it easier for people to dispose of them, and encourages recycling by making it possible to do it quickly and safely. Let's review. Anyone who works with universal waste has a responsibility to manage it in a way that protects both people and the environment from harm. If universal waste batteries are handled correctly, it can reduce the risk of leakage. But if they do leak, you need to know how to keep yourself and those around you safe. A universal waste handler is responsible for disposing of used and recalled pesticides safely, and knowing what to do if they are released into the environment. Even though mercury-containing equipment is considered universal waste, a mercury spill can be very dangerous, so you should know how to protect yourself if one occurs. Universal waste lamps are very fragile, so you should always be careful when you're working with them and know what to do if they break. Working with universal waste aerosol cans is usually low risk, but puncturing and draining them for recycling can be dangerous, so you need to be familiar with safety procedures for disposing of them. Because the universal waste regulation makes it easier to recycle these commonly used hazardous materials, more and more companies are taking advantage of that opportunity and making the earth a safer place to live at the same time.